Hi everyone. So today's 21-day fast and prayer devotional is on the passage Jacob wrestles with God, which is taken from Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 to 32. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and humans, but have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. So in this passage, we have read how Jacob has a fight with a dark, shadow-like man, who actually turns out to be God himself. Can you even imagine having an actual wrestling match with the creator of the universe? To me, this shows the depth of Jacob's stubborn persistence. And this makes me laugh because I think we all have areas where we dig our feet into the ground and won't budge. I know an area that I'm trying to work on is my worrying about things. That to someone else, it might just seem like little things, but I've got a real talent for taking these things and blowing them up out of proportion and making them into big things. I need to learn to stop wrestling my problems from God and instead learn to give them to him. Surrender my problems and trust that God will deal with it. So far, Jacob's stubborn persistence has got him so far on his own, but now God's wrestling with him to take charge. He has stolen his brother's blessing from his dying father and is trying to take charge of the consequences of this. When we try and do life in our own strength, we make decisions without praying first or seeking godly advice. We're acting exactly like Jacob. We're trying to wrestle our destiny out of God's hands. But you may have already found out, as I have a few times, that God cannot be overcome. Jacob has also found this out. God touched his hip to end the fight, disabling Jacob from being able to continue. Myself and Craig have actually had a similar experience a few years ago. We were in the process of buying our first home, but we were torn between 2. We were looking at going for one over the other, but the seller actually ended up getting quite difficult with us. We were so stuck with what to do and how to proceed that we did what we should have done in the first place. We turned to God, we prayed, and we asked for a literal sign to point us in the right direction. And then one day, not long after that, we saw a poster, a literal sign, with the name of the road where the other house was. We both looked at each other and we just knew. We thanked God and pursued the house where we now live. But just think, if we'd have sought after God's advice in the first place, we would have probably saved ourselves 3 or 4 months of stress in the buying process. But the stress we encountered was God touching our hip socket. The house buying process was disabled and only proceeded after we asked for God's help. God encourages persistence. In fact, he honours it. But God honours the persistence in pursuing him. As soon as Jacob relented and asked for God's blessing, he was surrendering to God's will. If you lay your challenges at God's feet and surrender them to him, God will honour your trust in him and in that situation. By being renamed Israel, which translates to struggles with God, Jacob is reminded that he needs God, and that when we turn to him, he has our corner. God renamed numerous biblical individuals. Each new name revealed how that person has been altered after they've put their trust in God. From this point, Jacob had turned from a persistent deceiver to a persistently seeking God, and with a reminder with each painful step that he cannot do life in his own strength, but instead to trust that God has a plan for his destiny. This goes for all of us as well. God has a plan for each and every one of us. The ultimate goal is to bring him the glory and further God's kingdom on earth.